Life's a puzzle, so let's play some pieces today and build a foldable puzzle mat. I started the project by cutting some 4/4 walnut lumber to rough length. Then at the joiner, I milled one face and one edge flat. With the flat side down, I could plane the top. Over at the table saw, I ripped my board into 2-inch strips. From there, I used my miter gauge to cut a 45-degree miter onto one side of all 4 boards. I then flipped the boards and cut a mirroring 45-degree miter onto the other side. With my cross cuts done, I could switch back to my ripping blade. In a project like this, I do swap blades quite often. From there, I ripped a 1/2-inch rabbet along the inside edge of the frame. With my first cut done, I adjusted my fence and made my second cut for the rabbet. Make sure that the offcut faces away from the fence when ripping the board to avoid kickback. Using my crosscut sled, I cut 2 of the mitered boards in half. These pieces will become the hinged frame. I left them a little long, so I cut them to final length here. Then I snuck up on the final length for my 45-degree miters. With the frame cut, I cut down some 1/2-inch baltic birch for the panels. Then I cut the length down to match the square dimensions of the interior frame. I made a router jig for the butler hinges. Here I carefully cut around the template and remove the material for the face of the hinge. Referencing the same point as the first jig, I used another to route in the deeper channel for the hinge pin. Creating jigs for these types of repeated cuts make them a lot easier to do. With everything cut, I could glue the frames to the panels. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a like. It helps me reach more viewers like you. I raised my table saw blades so that the cut depth and cut length were equal. Then using a stop block, I cut the grooves for my keys. These are both for strength and a design aesthetic. I'm creating the splines out of maple to give them some more contrast. Using a bandsaw gives me more control for these tall thin cuts. Then I used a Japanese pole saw to remove the rest of the material. I marked out the triangles for the splines, and then at the bandsaw cut them out. I made sure that they were a snug fit and then glued them in place. While the glue dried, I cleaned up the rounded corners left by the router. A chisel works great for making these cuts flat and square. To attach the hinge, I used a self-centering drill bit to drill in my pilot holes. Then I used a screwdriver to drive them home. I clamped the hinge to the frame to hold it in place while I drilled the pilot holes and connected the two pieces. Then I tested the hinges to make sure they functioned properly. I'm using a locking channel to connect the mat to the top of the Lazy Susan. Here I'm routing a channel that will accept the wood block into the panel's bottom. With the glue on the keys dry, I use a flush trim saw to cut away the excess. Make sure to cut away from the corner when trimming the spline to avoid blowing out the corner's grain. There's a lot of ways to get these flat. Let me know in the comments your preferred method for flushing up splines. Over at the bandsaw, I cut out the two blocks that will lock the mat to the Lazy Susan. These are cut to the width and depth of the previously routed panel. With the blocks cut, I could check the fit. I cut down some extra stock that I had for the edge banding of the Lazy Susan. The featherboard both prevents kickback and helps keep the thickness the same for each piece. I had some leftover walnut ply from another project. Here I cut the board square for the Lazy Susan. I used a square for the top and base to improve its stability. With both pieces cut, I could glue on the edge banding. I really like these bandy clamps from Rockler for this process. With the first glue up complete, I used a flush trim saw to remove the excess banding. From there I could glue on the remaining pieces. Then I sanded all the banded sides. I marked the center point for the top of the Lazy Susan. This is what I will use to center the locking blocks. I masked off the edges of the blocks and then glued and clamped them in place. The tape minimizes the glue cleanup. Then using an 1/8 inch roundover bit and a trim router, I softened all the top edges of the frame, making sure to avoid the area where the locking clasps will go. Next, I marked out the placement for the Lazy Susan hardware. Then I drilled pilot holes for the mounting screws. At the drill press, I plunged the hole in the Lazy Susan bottom for the access point. If you're enjoying this content, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for your support. Next, I checked the fit for the hardware. I then sanded all the pieces up to 180 grit. Once everything was sanded, I wiped it all down with mineral spirits. This just preps the wood for the rubio monocoat finish. The last step before finishing was to make my mark. Next, I mixed Rubio Monocoat Pure with the accelerator and applied it to the pieces with a Scotch-Brite pad. To see a more in-depth look at this finish, click on the card in the upper right. If you would like to purchase any of the tools or products you've seen used in this video, you can find a full list in the description below. I do make a few pennies if you buy, but I would never link something that I wouldn't use myself, so buy with confidence. Avoid finishing any areas where you're going to place glue down. One important note here is to wipe away any excess, otherwise the finish will become sticky and will not dry properly. For the playing area, I'm using felt. A rotary cutter makes cutting the felt incredibly easy. I recommend cutting out an MDF template of the exact size you need, otherwise you'll be chasing the proper size all night. Then using contact cement and a friend, I recruited my wife for help here. Apply a thin layer to the panel and a thin layer to the felt. Then press the felt onto the panel, ensuring that it lines up with your frame. With the felt down, I went back with a roller to ensure that the felt had no bubbles. Any overhanging felt was trimmed flush with the rotary cutter. Next, I attached the Lazy Susan hardware to the panels. Then I could reattach the butler hinges to the frame. With everything assembled, I could do the much anticipated spin. I applied double-sided tape to the back of the clasps. This will make marking out the screw holes easy. I then did the same for the brass handle. I then used a small reference square to make sure they sat vertically. I marked the hole placement with an awl. Then the handle got the same treatment. Next, I could drill in the 1/16 of an inch pilot holes. The screws for the clasps were incredibly small. The screwdriver made for electronics worked great for driving them in. The final step in the build was to attach the handle. This build was a lot of fun. It presented some new challenges and made me work more precisely than on some other projects. The final piece is beautiful, sturdy, and functional, as it can be used with or without the base. And the folding hinges means we can use it pretty much anywhere. I know my son is going to love it when he builds and plays for years to come. If you enjoyed this project, please subscribe. I post new builds regularly. If you haven't done so yet, check out my other project videos. I'll see you next time.